Hello, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Carly Riley. I have been covering the Sam Bankman-Fried trial since day one, bringing y'all everything you need to know about what's happening in this case. And I was there all day today when one Mr. Samuel Bankman-Fried took the stand for real this time. He took the stand yesterday and testified as part of a hearing just in front of the judge and the press and everything, but the jury was not there. But today he testified in front of the jury. I have actually already recorded this video. If you're sensing that I'm a little bit frazzled, it's because I already recorded this video and then I realized I hadn't actually recorded the sound. So now I'm having to re-record the video, and I already started this recording quite late because I had done a bunch of prep because I really wanted to break some things down for y'all that I'm excited about, that I think you're going to enjoy, but it took a lot of time. So this video is going to come out very late. I'm going to do an entirely minimal edit on it so I can get it out as soon as possible. So please do forgive any level of, I don't know, lower quality than usual, though I feel like I'm kind of a bad editor in general, so who knows, maybe it'll be better this time for not editing it more. Okay, but let's get into it. Let's get into today. Sam testified. I thought he did quite well in the first half of today, and I thought the second half, I don't know, it's hard to say how he did in the second half. Well in some ways and not well in others. The second half of today is really where we started to hear from him around what I would call the meat of this case, which is where he started to present his counter narrative for stories that we've heard from other witnesses. So what I have done is I have gone back through all the transcripts of past witnesses to pull together Sam's version of the story based on what he testified to today and the transcript from today, and then what other witnesses have said. So we're going to do a direct comparison between what witnesses have said and what Sam has said, and y'all can judge for yourself what you think of that. And I'm really excited to talk to you about it. The first half of today was really spent on the softer stuff, the feel-good stuff, the letting the jury get to know Sam. We all know him, but the jury does not. So it was things like his vision for FTX when he started it, and I never thought it was going to get this big, and letting him reset the narrative on certain things that to me are cosmetic, but sure, like, you know, the prosecution wanted to make it seem like he was this really calculated supervillain, and he wore shorts and t-shirts even after he got big and famous because he liked the way he liked to project a certain vision of himself. And Sam testified today, I wore shorts and a t-shirt because they were comfortable. And to me, I'm like, it's probably both, in the sense that I'm sure he was aware he was projecting a certain image of himself when he wore those shorts and t-shirts after he got famous, and he liked that vision of like the weirdo cult figure of the multi-billion-dollar company, the genius so up in the clouds he didn't know how to dress properly. But I don't care that he felt that way. Like, to me, that has no bearing on whether he was guilty or innocent. Like, I think that's a totally innocuous thing to be calculated as the CEO of a company about how you want to dress. I don't care. So it was things like that. We heard him justify the marketing spend in ways that I thought were legitimate. You know, why he felt like spending money on Miami-Dade Arena was worthwhile, and how that was a spend that was going to take place over 19 years. So it wasn't like that $135 million top line number that we've all heard was what they were spending in 1 year. In fact, what he testified to was, look, we made $1 billion in 2021. My marketing, I spent between $1 and $200 million on marketing with all these deals that I did. I thought spending a 10 to 20% revenue spend on marketing was totally reasonable. And I agree with that. Like, I think it's easy to get caught up in, oh my God, that looks so bad and excessive, especially when you consider the fact that the customer money piece of this, like, what, especially when you look in hindsight at everything that has happened. But I don't know that I think all of these things, when you really dig into them, were totally unreasonable business decisions. Anyway, so we heard stuff like that. I thought Sam was very good at this portion of things. If he wasn't, that would be like really bad news for him, because this is like the easiest it's ever going to be, is just like seem sort of charming to a jury while talking about your life story, basically. Okay, so let's really get into part two, because this is the pièce de résistance. This is the meat of it. There are 5 key stories that I want to highlight here. I'm going to try and go through these fairly quickly, though they all require some context, but I think you'll enjoy. I really enjoyed looking side by side at what the prosecution's witness said, what Sam has said, and then determining what I think the truth is. So let's go through it. Okay, the 5 stories, by the way, we're going to talk about backdating revenue. There's a charge about how Sam basically, manufactured or lied about the 2021 revenue. There's a story about balance sheets that I think is so pivotal. Like, I think this is the key to the case, honestly. If I had to pick one, is balance sheets. And I'll talk about why and these different stories that we get. The conversation that Sam had with Adam Yedidia, this was the paddle tennis court conversation. I talked about it way back when in the beginning of these videos because it was one of the first bits of testimony that we heard. Really interesting, worth revisiting that. The conversation about shutting down Alameda, and the famous balcony conversation that Sam had with Nishad on the balcony in the Bahamas. We're going to take a look at that one as well. I think you'll enjoy this. Okay, getting into it. Starting with number one. Okay, backdating revenue. Here is the story as far as we knew it when Nishad told it. So in 2021, late 2021, they're calculating revenue for the year, and it turns out that FTX has made about $950 million, $960 million in revenue for the year. Sam wants that to be a nice round $1 billion, no doubt, because he wants to be able to tell investors that they made over $1 billion in 2021. And so Sam, according to Nishad, Sam messaged Gary and Nishad, and Nishad said maybe there were others in there too, and said, what can we do to get FTX revenue over the $1 billion line? Sam and Gary apparently went back and forth for a little while, talking about some of their options for getting over that $1 billion line. And in the end, Nishad said, Sam landed on charging for the service of Serum staking. Serum was a cryptocurrency. Some other exchanges charged money when folks staked, whatever. It doesn't matter. Point being, this was what they determined would be the way that they would boost revenue. And Nishad said that Sam made that decision after going back and forth with Gary. Sam then even got more specific, Nishad got more specific. He said that Sam proposed charging EcoSerum to the account that paid the interest, 25% of the USD equivalent of the interest distributed to FTX. Don't worry about what that means at all. It doesn't matter. It just goes to show another layer of specificity that Nishad got, saying like Sam specifically said this is how we should do it. We should charge them 25%. And then Nishad said that Nishad was told to make it appear as though customers had been getting charged throughout the year for this staking service. And so to backdate the transactions associated with paying this fee, backdate that transaction to make it look like this has been going on all along. And then he was asked, who told you to do that? And he said, Sam did. So obviously, any way you look at it, that's kind of illegal to lie about your revenue if you're then trying to raise money on what your revenue was from the previous year. This is Sam's version of this. I almost feel like this is like, they get less egregious over time. I don't know. All of them are kind of egregious. Anyways, this is Sam's version of this same thing. Sam says that he had done his own calculations and he had calculated that the 2021 revenue for FTX was over $1 billion, but that Romnick, who was the head of product, but who did a lot of investment work with Sam, that Romnick had calculated it at being just under $1 billion. So Sam says he then asked Romnick to just double check Romnick's number, make sure you're right, Romnick, and consider if there were any sources you may not have been considering. And Sam says this on the stand, yeah, I just wanted to make sure he got the right number, was almost the vibe of it. Sam says he doesn't hear anything about it, but that he then checks back in with Romnick later. And Romnick said Nishad was handling it. And then Sam checked with Nishad, and Nishad said that Nishad had dealt with it, quote, he had dealt with it. And then he said it was by doing something with these EcoSerum staking rewards, and that Sam said he was, quote, very surprised because he had not thought of any EcoSerum staking rewards as part of this. I will say this, there are times where there are different narratives about what happened, and I'm a little bit up in the air, this could be just a difference of opinion. And then there are some where I really believe one person over another, and this is a case where I definitely believe Nishad's version of this. It is unthinkable to me that Sam made some benign comment to Romnick, hey, double check your number, that Romnick then, without ever checking in with Sam about any of this, goes to Nishad, tells him to create a bunch of fake backdated transactions around EcoSerum staking, and that Nishad also just didn't check with Sam or do anything else and just was like, yeah, sure, boss. I mean, Romnick wasn't even Nishad's boss. The idea that Sam was not involved in any of that is completely unbelievable to me on every level. Now, here's the thing. That isn't actually all that material to the more core issues of this case. I guess that whole thing probably speaks to investor fraud, as I was mentioning earlier, because it means they gave fraudulent revenue numbers to investors. And yet, do I think a single investor who invested in 2022 would have changed their mind about the investment if the revenue had been $950 or $960 million versus $1 billion? No, I don't. So I actually don't think, like, in the scheme of crimes, this feels like, I mean, kind of victimless, if I'm being honest. I don't think there's really a huge problem with that. But it certainly speaks to Sam getting up on the stand and having a conveniently wild memory of what went on. But next thing I want to talk about, and I'm taking these chronologically, this next one, if the backdating revenue piece is not overly material to the core heart of this trial and this issue, this next story that I want to talk about is like the centerpiece. So this requires a little bit of context, but I'm talking about balance sheets here. There's sort of these misremembering around balance sheet numbers, and there's more context. Okay, so we've talked a lot on this show about the period in June of 2022 after Terra Luna has collapsed and the crypto ecosystem is crumbling. And basically, there's a big accounting effort that gets undertaken by FTX and Alameda executives, Caroline, Sam, Gary, and Ashad, to really look at, okay, what does Alameda owe? What does it have? What does FTX have and owe, et cetera, et cetera. And as part of that, they also discovered that there's this bug in the code base. They fixed the bug, and then they're doing this number tallying thing. Caroline testified that around this time, and we know this is true, this isn't just her testimony, but a lot of lenders, companies that had been lending money to Alameda to trade with, were starting to recall their loans because things were imploding and they wanted their money back. And you also had lenders like Genesis who were asking Caroline for balance sheets, saying, hey, can we get the mark-to-market balance sheets of Alameda? So Caroline testified that as part of one of their accounting meetings that they had, the topic of sending a balance sheet to Genesis came up, and there was some back and forth about how to handle this. It was even said that Sam had at one point said we should make it look like we have more assets than we do. I don't think he said that explicitly, but he basically said, like, what if we all put our personal serum stakes together and gave them to FTX to make it look like FTX had more assets on the balance sheet, some stuff like that. Okay, whatever. Caroline then goes after this meeting and prepares an honest balance sheet, according to Caroline, of like the actual situation that they were in. And then proceeds to send that to Sam with a note, according to Caroline's testimony. She sent it to Sam over Signal, and she basically said, she said, this is our balance sheet. I think it looks bad. I don't think we can send this to Genesis. Do you agree? And Sam said, and according to her, Sam said, yeah, that sounds right. And then she says that Sam said, why don't you prepare some alternatives, some alternative versions, alternative ways to display this information, is what she said, he said, and send it back to me. So Caroline proceeds to create an 8-tab spreadsheet, and she does like 7 alternative versions and sends that to Sam. And then she says that Sam selects alt number 7 and says, like, let's go with this one, send this one to Genesis. Now, I have talked about this particular balance sheet in the past and how it compares to the original balance sheet that she had apparently sent Sam. And I'm not going to break it down in too much detail here. You can go find the past video. I'll link to it below if you want to know. But basically, Alameda was borrowing $9.9 billion from FTX. That was in the original thing. And then FTX had invested like $5 billion in venture companies. And she basically like netted those against each other. So she got the liability down to be lower than it was. And then she moved the liability and made it a long-term liability. Doesn't matter. Don't worry about it. Point is, it was a bullshit balance sheet. And that was the one that Sam selected and said, send that to Genesis. And it was totally misleading. This, again, according to Caroline. And she does that. And that's her version of this story. Sam's version of this story, it was very brief. It was basically like after the bug was discovered. I referenced this bug earlier, which led to all of these accounting things that they did. Sam said after the bug was discovered, Caroline Ellison said that okay, well, now that we actually have more money than we think we do, they were still in debt, but the bug made it look like they owed less money than they thought they did. Caroline was like, all right, well, now that we have more money than we think we do, this is according to Sam, Caroline said we should probably send the balance sheets to lenders. And Sam said, that sounds good. And then Caroline said, it also probably makes sense for us to return the loans that people are asking us back for. And Sam again said, that sounds good. And Sam testified that he thought the money that was being used to pay back those lenders were coming from Alameda's assets, not from customer money, is what he said. Also in court, the defense pulled up the exhibit while they were questioning Sam today, the exhibit of the 8-tab spreadsheet that Caroline says she sent to Sam after having sent him an original spreadsheet called main, which was in this 8 tabs, as like, hey, here are the alternatives. And Sam picked this alt number 7. The way Sam described this in court was like he only ever saw alt 7 tab. Like, oh yeah, I saw this one sheet that I'm looking at right now. I don't really know if I saw any of the other ones. And I told her this one sheet that I saw right now looked good. This one fraudulent balance sheet. He very much made it sound like he did not actually look at any of the other balance sheets and like this was the only one she sent him. This is so important to know if this is true or not. Because here's the thing. That first spreadsheet, that main spreadsheet, in addition to, I believe, some of the other alternatives, had a line that said exchange borrows. And that was how much money Alameda was borrowing from FTX. And that number was $9.9 billion in June of 2022. Now, FTX made $1 billion in revenue in 2021. Over the course of 2021 and early 2022, they raised about $1.5 billion. So they had, like, in the course of the entire history of the company, like probably at best up to that point, had $5 billion that they had made via revenue and investor money, like maybe. So if Alameda is borrowing $9.9 billion from FTX, but all the money that FTX has ever made in revenue, not even profit, ever made and ever gotten from investors is only $5 billion, that means that at least $4.9 billion of the money that Alameda is borrowing from FTX must be coming from customers. Now, of course, I'm being incredibly hyperbolic here because, of course, Alameda can't be borrowing all of the money the company has ever made because the company is also using that money to pay employees and all of these other things. But it's to illustrate that Sam, if he saw that spreadsheet and he saw that number, he had to know as of June of 2022 that Alameda was borrowing many, many billions of dollars, on the order of at least $5 billion from FTX customers. Now, this doesn't necessarily totally incriminate him. This isn't necessarily the total smoking gun because Sam has testified he believed that within the margin lending system that existed within FTX and Alameda, that there was a certain amount of customer money that they were allowed to be borrowing. And that seems to be true. Like there's a certain amount of money that they could have been borrowing from other users on the exchange. Maybe in another video, we'll dive really deep on this. Bottom line is, this is why this matters so much. Knowing when Sam knew how much Alameda was borrowing is really, really critical. And conveniently, or maybe it's true, Sam, in his own testimony, saw a spreadsheet with 8 tabs on it and only looked at the second tab in the spreadsheet, even though presumably when he opened the spreadsheet that was sent to him via Signal, it would have opened onto the main spreadsheet, the main tab, where it said that the exchange borrows was $9.9 billion. But maybe he just happened to only see the second tab, and that was that. In any case, that was the 2 versions of the testimony. I'm inclined to believe Caroline's. It was much more specific. It felt much more believable. And we had some backup from Gary Wong's testimony where he also said that there was some conversations between all of them about Genesis's loans and how to respond to things. So you also have the backup there. But I'll admit, it's not like a 100% smoking gun, Sam is guilty thing. Okay. The next story to analyze here, which ties us right into what we were talking about with this Caroline Ellison conversation before. The number 3 here is this convo with Adam Yedidia. For folks who haven't listened to one of the earlier videos here, this is going to be a fun one to recap. Adam Yedidia, one of Sam's old friends, sadly, because they're not friends anymore. Adam was a senior engineer, software developer at FTX. And in June of 2022, he was the one who was tasked with fixing this bug that I've been alluding to earlier. And as part of that whole process of fixing the bug and looking in the code base, Adam discovered that Alameda owed FTX customers $8 billion. And he says that he was playing paddle tennis with Sam in the Bahamas at one point around this time. And this is what Adam says happens. Adam said that he started up a conversation with Sam on the paddle court tennis by bringing up the large debt owed by Alameda to FTX and asking something like, are things okay? So he's asking that specifically about this large debt, according to his testimony, that Alameda owes to FTX. And that Sam, in response, said something like, we were bulletproof last year, but we're not bulletproof this year. And then Yedidia said, how long until we're bulletproof again? And Sam said, I'm not sure, maybe something like 6 months to 3 years. And then Adam was like, is it going to be okay? Sam then was reassuring him, whatever. Okay, that's Adam's testimony that they were having a conversation specifically about the debt that Alameda owed to FTX. Now, Sam's version of this conversation is that they're playing paddle tennis and that, according to Sam, quote, Adam had asked me what Alameda's risk profile had looked like after the market crash in May and June of 2022. I said that I thought that, in effect, I thought it was decent but not bulletproof anymore, and that he was saying he was chiefly concerned when he said they weren't bulletproof anymore, that Sam was chiefly concerned about a future market crash. So in Sam's telling of this, Adam's just generally asking about Alameda's risk profile, and the way he phrases it makes it sound like because the market had crashed. So it sounds like Adam's just being like, hey, I know market's been rough lately, Bitcoin prices are down a lot. Is Alameda okay? And Sam's going like, oh, well, prices are down, so it's definitely not as good as it once was, and, the prices are crashing, and I'm worried, whatever, blah, 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 right? Which is very different than Adam asking him about the debt that Alameda owes to FTX, and Sam's like, we're not bulletproof on that. Again, I will say, it's not an entirely smoking gun. Just because Sam said that they weren't bulletproof regarding this $8 billion debt does not entirely mean he definitely broke the law. But if he's right that there was some amount of borrowing that was allowed within this spot margin trading program that existed on FTX. Anyway, okay, let's move on to conversation number 4. We have this conversation about shutting down Alameda. We've talked about this ad nauseum on this program. The big moments in this case happen in June of 2022 and in September of 2022. And in September of 2022, we know that Sam circulated a memo to Gary and Nishad suggesting that he was interested or saying that maybe they should consider shutting down Alameda. At which point, Gary and Nishad are like, okay, we're going to go investigate this. And they start a conversation with the 4 executives. They basically bring Caroline into the fold of this conversation after Sam has circulated this document to just the 2 of them to start talking about, can we shut Alameda down? Nishad says that he lays out, here's what I think would need to happen for Alameda to be shut down. And like, can we do this? And Caroline, according to Nishad, said, that's impossible. At which point he said that Gary then chimed in and said Alameda is borrowing $13 billion from FTX. Nishad said that he was sitting next to Sam at the time that signal message came through in their group chat, and that Sam seemed unsurprised and made up what I understood to be a false excuse to dodge an in-person meeting to discuss this. So Nishad is saying Sam didn't seem surprised to hear about that $13 billion number and then made up some excuse about not being able to come, as far as Nishad could tell. But Nishad is very nervous about this, so then he has a meeting with Gary and Caroline, understands it in more depth, understands it to be like a full-on hole in the balance sheet. Debate if it was a hole in the balance sheet or there was a solvency problem, but that's kind of a fine line. And then Nishad ends up asking for an individual meeting with Sam, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But now we have to hear Sam's version of these same set of events. Sam says he circulated this memo saying, hey, maybe we should shut down Alameda, and that Gary and Nishad came back to him and said that it just wasn't a good idea. And then Sam said, I, at the time, did not feel confident that I had gotten a clear reason why it wasn't a good idea. I do believe that they said something about it being difficult to shut Alameda down. And then he said that Caroline was then added to the conversation, the discussion with Gary, Nishad, and Sam. And then all that the defense asked Sam was, what was Caroline's view on whether to shut Alameda down? And Sam said she did not think that we should. But he didn't give any testimony about that specific 13 billion number that was really the crux of why they felt it couldn't be shut down. Because again, what that speaks to is Sam knowing that the amount of money that Alameda owed FTX was much larger than the amount of money that FTX had ever made or ever raised, meaning that definitively it must have been using customer money. Now, again, there's this question mark about was there any level of customer money that it was appropriate for Alameda to be using? And the answer seems to be yes, there was some amount of money that it was appropriate for them to be using, but was the amount that they were using within the bounds of that? In any case, the important part of this is that Sam's testimony about this whole situation noticeably lacks any mention of the $13 or $14 billion number and is just much vaguer, much more high level. look, Sam is probably a vague, high-level, absent-minded, big-picture thinker, so maybe there's that. But it also just makes it look like a less reliable story than the one being told by the other witnesses. Okay, this brings us to our final story today, the balcony conversation between Nishad and Gary. Let's hear their two versions of this. So Nishad testified that, again, he finds out that there's this $13 or $14 billion debt that Alameda owes to FTX that they cannot easily or certainly not immediately repay. This very much scares Nishad. He then asks Sam for an individual meeting, and they end up meeting on the balcony of the Albany in their luxury resort where they all lived in the Bahamas. And Nishad's version of this is that he apparently opened the conversation with Sam by saying, Caroline is freaked out by the NAV situation, which is net asset value. It was his way of referring to this hole in the balance sheet. And I am too. And then Sam said, I'm not sure what there is to worry about. NAV is fantastic by almost any measure. It was super positive, even if you don't include FTX and FTX US equity. And then Nishad said, well, what about what Caroline said today and Gary said today, that there's $13 billion borrowed and we can't pay it all? And Sam said, right, that. We are a little short on deliverables. And then Nishad said, how much is it short by? Sam said, that is the wrong question to be asking. The right question is how much can we deliver? And in 24 hours, if pressed, I think we could deliver around $5 billion. Given some more weeks, substantially more. Given some more weeks after that, substantially more. And then Nishad testified that he said something like, Jesus effing Christ. And Sam said, yes, this has been taxing some of my productivity by about 5 to 10%. For this past year, or he said something like that, according to Nishad. He couldn't remember the specifics. So that is Nishad's version of this conversation. Sam's version of this conversation is that Nishad came up to him in the balcony. They had planned this meeting, and Nishad said he was very concerned about a number of topics. He said that Nishad had gotten liabilities had gotten far larger than they had used to be, or than what he thought they were, and that he didn't know what to do. So just kind of this vague thing about how liabilities were larger now, and he was worried about that. And then Sam said, yeah, I'm worried about that too. Sam said that Nishad may have thrown out an $8 billion number, which is interesting because that's the first time we've gotten anything specific from Sam on any of this stuff in some ways, but it's different than the number Nishad said he said, and also the number Nishad said he said was definitely the accurate number. We know that Alameda was borrowing $13 or $14 billion at that time, so it does seem a little weird that he would have said $8 billion in this conversation. Anyway, make of that what you will. And then Sam said he was also somewhat worried about liabilities, but that NAV was positive, so don't worry too much and whatever. And then they talked about marketing. So I think what's interesting here is you do have parts of Nishad's testimony that help certain things that Sam has been saying throughout. They both seem to agree that Sam said that he thought NAV was positive and that was why he was feeling okay about things, or certainly better than Nishad was feeling. And Sam did seem to have this fixation on NAV, which in and of itself is weird because his whole NAV calculation was already kind of BS, and yet being an idiot CEO in that way, is not necessarily in and of itself a crime. And here's something that I think is interesting about all this, and in some ways the NAV focus that Sam had throughout is Sam did see himself or Alameda or whatever as borrowing this money. Now, again, the debate about was that even legal and that's a separate conversation, but he intended to pay this money back. And this outcome that happened, this tragic, horrible outcome, was not inevitable. And what I mean by that is if you look at Bernie Madoff or you look at Elizabeth Holmes, the outcomes of those two things were inevitable because they were rotten to their core. Bernie had no core product. He was taking money from clients basically, and then just giving them false balance sheets. He was not actually getting the trade returns that he was saying. And Elizabeth Holmes, same deal. She did not actually have a product that worked or even came close to working or doing what she said she was doing. So it was inevitable that at some point that was going to catch up to them. Sam had an actually working product in the form of FTX, and to a degree as well, with Alameda. And the problem was just an absolutely risk-on, laissez-faire approach to doing things. And I think Sam was willing to break the law. I believe he did break the law. I believe he knew he broke the law. And he just thought he was breaking the law to a small enough degree that he wouldn't get caught. He thought he was pushing boundaries. It's like the eco staking thing. Like that was like I said, a fairly victimless crime. He was pushing boundaries, and he was willing to push boundaries enough that he thought it wasn't going to end up blowing up in his face. The problem is he just wildly miscalculated the scale and scope of the boundary pushing he was doing. I don't know. In some ways, that's been my takeaway today of part of this. I will say he is going to get absolutely obliterated in the cross-examination, which will probably start on Monday. And I think he is just going to get torn into a million pieces if yesterday is anything to go by, which is when he was getting cross-examined by Danielle Sassoon yesterday. He was torn into a billion little pieces. It's also going to take forever because he won't give a straight answer to any question. Anyway, that was the day. I thought Sam did well, all things considered. I think his testimony differs from the prosecution's witnesses, and in most of these cases, I believe the prosecution's witnesses. I think their stories are just tremendously more credible. But Sam did at every turn, in a number of different places, testify that he always thought that it was either operating expenses that were being used to cover costs or, an appropriate amount of borrowing that was happening, and that he truly just was not keeping track of the scope and the scale of these numbers. We will see what happens in cross-examination, which will probably start Monday afternoon. And with that, I will see you all on Monday. Thank you for your patience for this video, and please do forgive any rough edits here. I am working as fast as I can to just get this done and get it out to y'all. Have a good weekend.